Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 56th call of the Amazon Investor Coalition. This is a weekly call and podcast series dedicated to advancing forest-friendly economic development and rule of law across the Amazon region of South America. This is a program of the Global Governance Philanthropy Network with support from Nexus and a bunch of other allies. This week, we are featuring the work of the Governor's Climate and Forest Task Force. A little bit more than a decade ago, Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger was involved in organizing a whole bunch of climate activism from the state of California, including the creation of this organization. And we're going to hear from several colleagues. I'm going to go ahead and grab people's LinkedIn IDs. We're going to hear from Colleen, Scanlan, Lyons, and Carlos Aragon and Fernando Briones. Colleen, please introduce yourself and tell us about your work and your colleagues.
Okay, thanks, Jonah. I have to apologize. I'm at the University of San Diego and it is high noon and the church here has decided to ring its bells. So hopefully you all can hear me. Jonah, can I get a thumbs up if you can still hear me over the church bells? Awesome.
Yeah, we hear you great.
So consider this divine intervention for forest conservation and blessing us with good energy. Jonah, we have a presentation that you can pull up and I'll just start talking a little bit. The way we are going to go through this is I'm going to give a quick overview of the GCF, and then my colleagues Fernando and Carlos are going to talk about some of the actions of the GCF in specific regions. For those of you who know the GCF, I do need to pay a special tribute to our coordinator from Peru, who recently passed away this past weekend. And so the entire GCF family is in mourning. For those of you who don't know the GCF, you're going to learn all about us and you're going to learn how this network truly is a family. So I just wanted to pay homage to Victor Galarreta. So the idea behind the GCF, and Jonah, you can run the presentation whenever you want, is, as Jonah said,
Colleen, I want to suggest that one of you.
Okay, Fernando can pull that up while I'm talking. That way I won't.
So if one of you.
He's on it. That way I won't lose time. So as Jonah said, the GCF was started over a decade ago by Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, and the idea truly was that subnational governmental leadership is important on the fight against tropical deforestation, the fight for sustainable development, the battle against climate change. You can run to the next slide, Fernando. And we've grown in just over a decade from 10 states and provinces, including founding member California, who continues to be extremely active, and 5 founding members from Brazil, as well as a couple from Indonesia, to now 38 states and provinces that occupy more than a third of the world's tropical forest countries. So the bottom line here is, if you want to get to subnational governmental leadership, working with the GCF is one of those ways to do that. You can buzz to the next one, Fernando. The idea behind the GCF is essentially fourfold, as we have here. Empowering governors and civil servants to actually promote jurisdiction-wide strategies, so strategies across entire states and provinces, connecting them with NGOs, with community organizations, with donor governments, with philanthropists, and having them work together as a large network. Unlocking forest finance, that is really, really key. Back in 2014, the GCF started with a landmark declaration called the Rio Branco Declaration, and governments that are part of the GCF committed to basically reducing deforestation in their states and provinces by 80% if adequate financing from the global community was brought forth. We are still waiting for that adequate financing, and we're going to get into LEAF and some of the initiatives right now. But the key point is, we've got governmental buy-in, we've got the folks at the table, but now we actually need to come together and figure out how to unlock more financing for impact across states and provinces, as well as entire regions. And then also tracking our performance. We have a GCF knowledge database. Is any of this work with governments actually making a difference? What does that look like? And that's why we're going to delve into kind of the details throughout this presentation. Next slide, Fernando. So as I mentioned, we work with governors, but you know what? Honestly, we work with secretaries of the environment and civil servants because these are the folks that manage up to governors every day. Governors have huge agendas. Forest protection is one of them, but they've also got education and health. And in the world of a pandemic, it's really difficult sometimes to manage those different priorities. So we work very, very closely with key civil servants, secretaries of the environment. And then if you think about how governmental transitions happen, thank God, all the time, working with civil servants who stay the course throughout their careers is really, really important because we have deep embedded knowledge. This is a picture of our governors from our last annual meeting, which was in Colombia, Caquetá, Colombia back in 2019. And like I said, the real kind of grist in the mill here is the civil servants and the secretaries. Next slide. So how do we do this? Recently, over the past couple of years, we've partnered very heavily with the government of Norway and the UNDP to have each state and province in the GCF develop a plan for how they're actually going to reduce deforestation. What does that strategy look like? What type of investment do they need? And those are the jurisdictional strategies and investment plans. Those are done. We're now moving into implementation of those plans. And then a new initiative is around innovation funding, looking at what real innovative strategies for reducing deforestation and at the same time promoting sustainable economic development, because that is absolutely fundamental, especially with COVID, how we can have innovation and learn from states like Pará, who are doing sustainable supply chain cattle tracking, and how we can take lessons learned from certain states and then spread that across the network. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we have a robust network. This is not just governments. They cannot do it alone. We know that governments have to be at the table, but they depend on the private sector and NGOs, all sorts of institutions. Jump to the next one. I'm talking really fast so we can get to questions here. And for several years now, beginning with the Rio Branco Declaration, but really beginning more wholeheartedly in substantively, I would say, in 2017, we have found ways to work with Indigenous peoples and local communities. There is a long history of antagonism between governments and Indigenous peoples. We absolutely believe that Indigenous peoples and local communities have to be at the center of governmental policies. And so we've created a global committee as well as regional committees. And we have this tenet, the guiding principles for collaboration and partnership, which we can give you the link to, that really sets forth how our governments are going to be working with IPLCs. Next slide. In Brazil, for example, and I will stress that the rubber meets the road at the local level. I'm at the Global Secretariat in Boulder, Colorado. We have Carlos in Brasilia and coordinators in Indonesia and Mexico and Peru. But really in our states and provinces and in our regions, that's where we learn from each other, we develop strategies, we develop important partnerships. So for example, the Brazilian Regional IPLC Committee, they've got membership established, they've got governance processes, and you can imagine how complex that was to figure out. They're working with the federal government, which is important and very, very much needed, given some of the history of the current federal government in Brazil. On the Floresta Mais program, they're working on safeguards, and then they're also looking at what are successful strategies like the Acre-CISA system. Can that be adapted? Can that be replicated and scaled? What worked? What didn't work? What about Mato Grosso's participatory councils for getting Indigenous leadership within governmental processes? Indonesia, we're focusing on Papua and West Papua and customary forest licensing. Next slide. In Mexico, we actually had a recent consultancy that said, all right, we've got these guiding principles of collaboration. What does it look like to actually implement those? How can we work with states in Mexico? And we can't just have guiding principles out here and public policies here. How do we weave those together so that policies actually have our code of ethics and our mission, vision, values driven into them? And then in Peru, we work with the 3 primary indigenous peoples organizations, as well as the subnational governments, to try and deal with things that we've all been dealing with, COVID relief. Next slide. So now I'm going to turn it over to Fernando. He's going to talk a little bit about Peru, Colombia, Ecuador, and then we're going to end with Brazil. And we know that we want to leave time for questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Colleen. Well, very briefly, in Peru, basically there are long-term actions that the coordination has been doing. One of the most important is actually the fourth of these bullets is the Amazon Regional Commonwealth. That means that the governors of these states of the Piura, Amazonas, Loreto, San Martin, Huánuco, Ullacali, and Madre de Dios are working together to build up some kind of a coalition, allows them to find better resources, taking better decisions for developing policies for protecting the Amazon basin. There's other partners involved, like TFA in the Jurisdictional Sustainability Initiative, and they work a lot in basically building coalition and building governance. This is important in a country who has been experienced a lot of political instability at national level. The way that states are organized to keep working makes all the difference. Then I'm gonna also talk a little bit about Caquetá, Ecuador, and Pastaza Caquetá in Colombia, and Ecuador, and Pastaza. And we are proud about something. The province of Pastaza in Ecuador has a letter of approval for REDD+ actions, and this been produced by the partnership between the government and the GCF. Also, they work very strongly with the local populations, with indigenous populations. Same that Colombia and Caquetá. In Caquetá, they have a very strong work with indigenous people, and they are working hard to the alignment of institutional planning tools for forests. And we all work together to try to find out resources and build up some governance in the region. There's, as you may know, there's a lot of potential and let me go back to the map, because I think this is very important. The south of Colombia and the east of Ecuador working together with Peru, it's a region with a lot of potential that needs to be developed. So now let's go to talk about Brazil, and this is Carlos Aragon, who is the regional coordinator in Brazil, who will explain this to us.
Thanks, Colleen, and thanks, Fernando. Good afternoon for everybody. This is the institutional arrangement in Brazil. You can see how is the GCF organized here, and the links with the private sector and the indigenous and local communities. Also, you can see that in Brazil, it's an inclusive platform, so we have a lot of partners for indigenous issues and also for climate and development issues. GCF members strongly believe that it is possible to contribute for the global climate change goals, and at the same time to reduce poverty in the Amazon by a new development model developed or based on the evaluation of its national or on its natural assets and led by jurisdictions. Next slide. Next, please, Fernando. Next. Next one. Okay. Based on GCF works on an innovative and co-production network, and activities are focused in short-term and medium-term and long-term climate action. Our work is guided by some principles, as, for example, investment, the risking, not to reinvent the wheel, scaling up good practices, focus on action, bottom-up solutions, intensive use of technology, and inclusive and cooperative action. The size of the challenge requires that we all must work together. In this slide, we present main areas of cooperation, so are totally open for contributions. Few words from Brazil.
Okay, I think that, yep, that's it. All right, we were a couple minutes over here, but I wanted to make sure that we really whizzed through this, and we're happy to go deeper. We're happy to talk in general about the GCF. How do you want to handle this, Jonah?
Great. I'm going to offer a couple questions, and then we'll open it up to the community. So first question for me, could you give us a little bit of background? How did the Secretariat end up being located in Colorado with the University of Colorado?
That's actually a funny and a very personal question. William Boyd worked, he is the project lead of the GCF, and he is a lawyer and had a position at the University of Colorado, was working very closely with folks in California, Tony Brunello, folks at the California Air Resources Board, and a number of governors. And they said, you know what, let's form this subnational governmental network. And if we put it at a university, it's this very neutral territory that everybody can join. And now we're at the University of Colorado. We've been here since the beginning. William's teaching at UCLA, but I'm a professor at the University of Colorado. So we have this kind of strange structure, but it works because we can be pretty agile, and we're really into partnering with NGOs, with different funding agencies, with different institutions. And the university has worked out to be a pretty good platform. And then I would like to emphasize too, the regional offices are absolutely crucial. We could not do this work, which is really inherently bottom up, without our 4 regional offices, as well as the key delegates in places where we don't have regional offices, like Colombia and Ecuador. So it's really this kind of big family bottom up network that has a little bit of a strange structure, but it works.
Great, thanks for that. While you were speaking, my internet connection went dead and reconnected. So I've posted the next 3 questions in case that happens again. So while I'm here, I'll ask the next one. What's the status, if any, of enrolling states from Bolivia and the 3 countries of the Guiana Shield?
So I'm going to toss this over to Fernando, but I will say, because I've been here for almost 7 years now, the GCF has never gone out and said, join us. We've had states and provinces come to us and say, this is politically important for us to be a member of this network. And we have very formal processes where you have to be a member, no, you have to be an observer for 1 year, which means coming to an annual meeting, observing this governmental network and figuring out, does this make sense in the context of your state or province, and or not? And then to gain entrance, you have to be sponsored by one of the founding members. And remember, there are actually only 10, and Illinois was one of those 10, and it's kind of become inactive, shall we say. Illinois went through some political administrative changes. So we're down to 9 founding members. And that means that you have to work with the founding member to sponsor your membership, to work with your governor, to make sure that the commitment truly is there, and this isn't just in name only. However, we're now at this critical point in the GCF where we're trying to figure out, do we grow? What does growth strategically look like? Do we not grow? And here I'm going to toss it over to Fernando, because this guy is getting requests a lot. And right now our members, they're trying to figure this out.
Thank you, Colleen. Thank you, Jonah. Well, there's a growing interest at the GCF. First, there's a few states in Ecuador who has been in the line, and also in Bolivia, to join the GCF, and especially Morona Santiago in Ecuador, and in Bolivia, Tarija. And there's also growing interest from Pando, from Santa Cruz. But I guess the most important is the way that we expect to grow, supposed to be related to, it needs to be related to an strategical, I mean, we know that the regional approach could be very important for us. And if there's something that I think we should be proud of the GCF is we work locally at this jurisdictional level, but also we are a global network. So now with the other states like these Amazonian states in Ecuador and Bolivia joining potentially the GCF in the next years, we expect to have a better coverage of the Amazonian region, including the states that are not big actors like Pando, but still they have a very important strategical region for all of us, and they have great coordination with other regions in other countries like Acre in Brazil or like Madre de Dios in Peru. So we are figuring out how to approach this in the best way. the most important is to build up some strength together and find solutions all together. And I think cooperation in that case is the key. And I think we also, by the way, this is not Amazon, and I get it, but in Africa, there's also important growing interest, like Grand Ponds in Côte d'Ivoire, and we try to support as much as we can. But the most important is to build up regional cohesion and cooperation between governors, and we're going in that pathway.
And is the process any different for donor government governors, like from Illinois or maybe other states in the United States that may be interested?
No, we have kind of we're tailoring this now, because one of the things that's happened in the past 2 years, I would say, remember we went from 10 to 38 states and provinces. So managing this network has become challenging and exciting in different ways. And we've decided that we need an executive committee. So a couple years ago, we formed an executive committee that has 2 members from each of the regions. And by region, I mean nation states. So 2 from Brazil, Peru, blah, blah, blah. California is a standing member of the executive committee. And as Fernando says, we're really bottom up. So we're tossing this membership issue back to the executive committee to say, how do we want to grow? What does that look like? Maybe in the future, Jonah, if some states from the United States want to become members, there would be different criteria for membership, but we haven't had that at this point.
Great. 2 last questions for me. I'm going to wrap them in the same, and already there are a lot of questions inside the chat, which is very exciting. So 1, how are you guys helping to de-risk investments? And second, how do you guys facilitate learning? Discoveries, lessons learned in one region or state can be shared with another. How do you facilitate that?
Carlos, why don't you take the de-risking investment? Because I know you're working on that a lot in Brazil.
One of the main risks in the Amazon region to develop a low emissions development economy is based on the environmental regulatory framework. So what we are focusing now is to reduce bureaucracy, to be most cost effective, and in this by these activities that include some of the lists that was presented in the PowerPoint are important to reduce the cost of investments in the Amazon.
And regarding the question on sharing across the network that's in the chat here, that's exactly right. Leaders from the former government, the Viana administration in Acre, are now working in Mato Grosso to talk about how the state CISA, the REM system, was set up. And they're consulting with the government of Mato Grosso. So in one way, like, it's kind of like the Hotel California. You can check out anytime you want, but you can never leave. And we have our members that even they might not still be in government, but they're finding ways to share lessons learned. We also work pretty hard to put out publications. We have a lot of learning exchanges. And right now in the upcoming bioeconomy forum that's going to be in Pará, we are having governors from Peru come to Pará to actually meet with Brazilians to say, how is bioeconomy development happening in Brazil? What can we learn from you? And then we have little sub-regions, you know, obviously with Acre across the border, Madre de Dios, we end up having kind of these affinity groups. And then finally, the IPLC forum is really good because indigenous leaders and local community leaders can talk about how they've actually worked with governments with success as well as with failure. We really believe that we need to learn when things are not perfect. How do we adapt that? What does participation look like? How can we adapt it to another place and scale it? So we have a lot of meetings and we have a lot of Zoom calls and we have a lot of WhatsApps, and we share information that way.
Great. Okay, questions. James Lewis, question askers, please introduce yourselves briefly before your question. Thanks. You're up, James.
Hi, great. Sorry, thank you very much. This is absolutely fascinating, and sorry for coming in a little bit late, so if you've already answered these. But I had 2 questions. One was just when the next annual meeting is going to be. And then the second one is, what role do you see for funders of conservation, particularly forest conservation, to have in the network, and particularly helping your members? Thank you.
So next annual meeting, James, I've got fingers and toes crossed that this is going to be either the last week in January or first week in February. It's looking like it's going to be the first week in February in Manaus, Amazonas. We have a rotating chairship of the GCF, and that is an elected chair. So last year, the government of, 2 years ago, before COVID, the government of Amazonas, Brazil, was elected as the global chair. And the global chair always hosts the annual meeting. And that's back to that question on how we share knowledge and experiences and lessons learned. That's a really great way. So hopefully in February 2022. And then how can conservation funders really get engaged? And Carlos, jump in here with any information you have, or Fernando. I think it's very important to work with the states and provinces and meet them where they are. Try and understand their realities. And that's kind of the value of the GCF. When we were talking about the LEAF Coalition a couple weeks ago with some colleagues, they wanted to know, what do states think about this? Does it work for them? Does it not work for them? How can investors actually come into a state like Mato Grosso and feel that they are de-risked and have impact in their investment and do this in a timely fashion? Well, you know, we go to the Secretary of the Environment and we say, what's going to work in your state and what's not going to work? They know, and they really have this deep practical experience. So go to use this network as a sounding board, as a kind of a testing space. Another thing I would say before I toss it into Carlos for specifics is actually working with existing processes. So we've got these jurisdictional strategies and investment plans. They need to be implemented. We have principles of collaboration. They need to be put into practice. Otherwise, it's just this really nice piece of paper where everybody's singing Kumbaya in a written form. So really working with structures that are in place. And each of our regions have annual roadmaps. They know how they want to work to reduce deforestation. And the final comment I would make is a lot of the carbon market work that we're getting involved in recently, that's not going to work unless we can reduce deforestation. So we have to look at multiple strategies, from command and control, which alone is not going to work, to what does bioeconomy development look like? How can we create sustainable supply chains? And this is getting into Alex's question, that work across entire states and provinces. So now I'll toss it over to Carlos and Fernando, because you guys have some of the regional specifics, but I think that was a great question.
I think that you answer a big part of the question. What I just want to add is that conservation is part of the strategies that states in the Amazon are implementing for low emissions development. And as Colleen said, we have a lot of opportunities because in some conservation units, we have people living inside. So we can work together on bioeconomy, which is part of the priorities. And we also work in the strategies against forest fires, et cetera, et cetera. So conservation is important. And what we have to do is just to identify exactly what can be your contributions and to start working together on that.
And as
Great.
one last thing, as Carlos said, each of our regions, they have ready-made proposals that integrate with their jurisdictional strategies and investment plans. So it's not starting from nothing here. They've got a plan and they now have plans for how to implement this. So I think going to those ready-made proposals is key. Okay.
Alexandre, you're up next.
Thank you. Thanks, Jana. Well, congratulations. Excellent. It's a great presentation, teamwork presentation, Colleen, Fernando, and Carlos. As you know, at USA Brazil, we have idealized the structuring of the partnership platform for the Amazon and invested in the development of this platform, just looking at mainly providing the private sector some protagonists. So it's our hope that the private sector is going to lead the PPA. And my question is, in this regards, how do you see the private sector role when it comes to the work that GCF does? So that'll be my question. Thank you very much.
Carlos, do you want to jump in there? Because I know that the Brazilian states are really working on bioeconomy development. Oh, Carlos, você está no mudo.
Sorry. There is a consensus in the region about bioeconomy. Command and control is essential for short-term results, but for medium and long term, it is not enough. And that was this is a lesson learned from the past, from the implementation of the first plans against deforestation, illegal deforestation. So bioeconomy is essential for reducing illegal deforestation, and at the same time to improve social conditions in the region. So we are working on that and there are a lot of players, a lot of partners also doing that. So the big challenge is how to integrate and how to work together. And for this, we are working now in the preparation on what we call the Manaus Action Plan, which is a planning proposal that was proposed by the presidency, the global presidency of GCF. And what we are doing on that is trying to organize all the initiatives that are ongoing but are isolated, and using the lead of the subnational government to work together and try to finally start a new model of development based on natural assets that was not done in the last more than 200 years.
So Alex, everyone's talking bioeconomy. What does that really look like? How do you have governments create the enabling conditions for investors to come in and say, this makes sense. I'm going to invest in, I don't know, cacao production in the state of Amazonas or cupuaçu. And how do you kind of go through the supply chain from the very beginning of the product, harvesting it in the forest, all the way to exporting it, be it domestically or internationally? What legal conditions, what political policies facilitate that? I think that the private sector really is a game changer for sustainable development in places like the Amazon, but the private sector alone can't do it, and governments alone can't do it. So how do we bring them together to have realistic partnerships? And I do like the pace that the private sector moves at too. So because government isn't always known for being rapid, shall we say. All right, we've got what, James?
Thank you.
Next up is Mark. Mark Thibault, are you there?
Yes, I am. Fernando and Colleen, very good to see you again. Thank you for the presentation. So my question was about how indigenous communities or nationalities are involved in all the different processes that you've described. For instance, if you're going to have your next gathering in Amazonas in January or February, how do communities from Peru, Colombia, Ecuador do travel to Brazil, and what is their role? What is the platform that is offered to them so they can relate the concern or ideas about protecting the Amazon and also being involved in other bioeconomy schemes?
Carlos, I'm going to toss this to you because the Brazilian Indigenous Peoples Local Communities Committee is actually really, really engaged. And as you had mentioned, Mark, we want to get Peruvian indigenous leaders together with Brazilian collaborators. And back to that earlier question about how do we have collaboration and lessons learned, I will just open this up before tossing it to Carlos by saying, coming to the annual meeting and participating in the IPLC meeting that we always have separate before the annual meeting. And then obviously we involve all of our Indigenous and local community collaborators in the official meeting, but it's a dedicated time for us to sit in a room and just say, what's working across regions? Where do we need help? How can we be strategic with each other? So that's kind of the general overview, but then I'll toss it into Carlos to talk a little bit more about Brazil, because they've been very active lately.
Okay. In the case of Brazil, the institutional model or structure created to interact with indigenous people and local communities was a result of a discussion in the indigenous with indigenous leaders. They started to talk by their own, with the support of some NGOs, what could be the value added participating in a network as the GCF. So they were discussing for more or less 2 years about the opportunities, the challenges, and how to participate and to contribute for low emissions development. And in 2019, we started to talk, states started to talk with them in terms of how to create an instance, a dialogue instance, in which it will be possible to discuss specific issues, specific demands from indigenous in each state with the local governments. So then the regional committee was created, and it advances a lot because in this space dialogue, we had the opportunity, for example, during the last year and in the beginning of this year, to start talking about what does indigenous economy means for them, for indigenous people. So we started to talk about that. It's quite different than we supposed. In addition, we started to talk and to discuss with them in the communities about what are their funding priorities, for example. So we have now a list of investment priorities looking for the strengthening of their local organizations, but also the indigenous economy, and at the same time, the protection of their areas. In Brazil, due to the legal framework, there are some restrictions in terms of the actions that a state, or the subnational states or subnational governments could do in terms of interacting with indigenous communities. But also with this, it was possible to create an interaction and a cooperation agenda. So the committee is a place in which the discussions are done, their demands are received, and together we discuss ways to solve the problems and the challenges.
I want to jump in with oh, go ahead.
No, to attend their priorities. So continue, please.
Thank you, Carlos. I want to jump in with a really quick story of how the GCF works too, this crazy subnational governmental network that's very large and sometimes unruly. But the way that political pressure can happen and take root. And this story is a really quick vignette. We were at the last annual meeting in Caquetá, Colombia. And Gladson Kamali, who is an incoming governor for the state of Acre, after 2 decades of the Viana brothers going in and out of being governors and known as the government of the forest. So he came in, ran on a very different platform about production, and came to the GCF annual meeting to kind of check it out. And he saw an indigenous leader, Francisca Arara, at the GCF annual meeting, showing a lot of leadership, really bringing people together. And he said, number one, I don't want to shut down the Institute of Climate Change, because he was debating, do I shut this down or not? This seems to be doing some good work. And so it's continuing. And it's a very important example in the GCF and actually in the world for how you can have the state CISA law. And secondly, he said, I want Francisca Arara to actually work inside my government, because she can have more power, more to affect change from within the administration. So it's kind of an example of how you get governors together, and then they see indigenous leaders and they're thinking, all right, let's come together and figure out what that looks like. But it's just a fun little vignette of kind of how the government can work with indigenous peoples. Okay, Enrique?
Yeah, Enrique, you're up next.
Thank you, Joanna, Colleen, cheers, Hernando, Carlos. Trying to get into the reality of Victor Galarreta's passing away this weekend, the mayor lost. My question is more about Brazil. And actually, James was making a question before I did about the next GCF meeting. But I wanted to ask, I guess, more to Carlos. What is the lessons from the fact that the last host, appointed host is the governor Wilson Lima, and it is not it is not news for anybody, but he had it very hard in the last couple of years with COVID, as well as politically, not only the situation related to COVID, but also politically dealing with the federal government that wasn't that supportive. How did the GCF, do you think, has helped Governor Wilson Lima or other governors in Brazil facing this difficult moment, in terms of political empowerment as the governors representing their states in relation to the federal case? How do you see that, Carlos? What's your evaluation?
I will start, and then I will give the floor to Colleen to present, also to tell us about the initiative of supporting equipment to the government of Amazonas to deal with COVID. But for example, one of the outputs or results of the regional committee for partnerships with indigenous communities was the development of protocols to access indigenous territories. So we were discussing with them. We involved most of the NGOs that are helping and supporting indigenous communities in Brazil, and try to and we create a kind of a situation room to twice amount or 3 times amount or weekly sometimes. Meetings were held to try to monitor what was happening in the indigenous communities or communities in the indigenous lands, and this information was shared with the government. So this is one of the activities that we focused during COVID. And in addition, one of the main challenges of the subnational governments in the Amazon is how to get finance to support activities against deforestation. So what we are trying to do, we were trying to do in the last 2 years, was to support and to the strengthening of the subnational systems for REDD+ carbon commercialization. So what we call the climate change jurisdictional systems. So this was done as an opportunity to get and to attract investments to support activities against deforestation and forest fires. And at the same time, there were a lot of activities in terms of sharing lessons and sharing experiences, and in some ways sharing also systems. As Colleen told us, we have different levels of development in the Amazon state. So we are the most advanced in terms of technology, and we have the less ones. So what we try to do is to get the lessons, the information, and the experience of the more advances, and to implement these experiences in the less advanced ones. So specifically in the state of Amazonas, bioeconomy is essential, because we have a lot of sometimes we think that the Amazon region is a unique and very homogeneous land, and this is not true. We have several kinds of Amazonias, but the most preserved one, the most area of forest cover, is in the state of Amazonas. So bioeconomy is essential for them. Also for other states, but in terms of quantity or at the size of the territory, it's important to develop alternatives in terms of how to get more income for local communities, for local people using the natural assets. And at the same time, you know, Enrique, that we have another challenge in the Amazon. Sometimes we think that most of the population is concentrated in the rural areas, but more or less from 70 to 80% of the population is concentrated in cities. So we have to create the links between the forest economy with cities. And this is an opportunity to increase technology, to look for ways to add value for local products. And what we were doing is to try to create solutions. We also identified that one of the main problems and restrictions for a new economy is based on what is called the enable environment. So, and for that, we made a lot of studies, and we identified that we have some challenges to solve, as for example, the land tenure regularization, the environmental rural cadastre, licensing as another limitation. So the conditions for developing a new economy are not set up. So what we have to do is to focus on that. And this is part of the discussions and the decisions that are being taken by our subnational secretaries.
Great.
Enrique, too, I'll pop in the chat what Carlos was talking about. I just want to make one point. Oftentimes, the connection with the GCF is an international network that can be mobilized as needed. So when COVID hit and Amazonas was on the front page of every international paper, the governor of Amazonas went to the Secretary of Environment, not the Secretary of Health, went to the Secretary of the Environment and said, hey, you know, talk to this GCF network. They're always talking about forest conservation and our people right now are dying. And we were able to work with an organization, I'll put the link here, called Direct Relief to mobilize oxygen concentrators getting to the Amazon, which has nothing to do with forest conservation, and it has everything to do with forest conservation because the people that we work with are living in very remote areas, and we use the network in a powerful way.
Beto, you're up next.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good to see everybody here. Hey, Colleen, Fernando, Carlos, good to see you all. An intriguing question that keeps coming back to my mind is you mentioned earlier, Colleen, LEAF, right? I think most people here are aware of LEAF, this interesting program, the LEAF Coalition that is committing to put $1 billion to reduce emissions by reducing deforestation. We understand that proposals have already been submitted to Emergent, the organization that is managing LEAF. One of the concerns that we have at Forest Strands, a community initiative program that I run at Forest Strands, is in regards to safeguards when it comes to the implementation of LEAF, social safeguards in particular. LEAF has just put out, well, LEAF is going to be using for validation verification of the emissions reduction, this ARTS-3 standard, and they just released ARTS-3 2.0, wherein they're saying that they're contemplating two new things. One is this high forest low deforestation as a potential window of opportunity for this finance to go through, as well as what I understood. I still need to understand it better, but from what I understand, maybe others here know better, there's also this opportunity for indigenous-led jurisdictions. So in that context, we know that proposals have already been submitted. We would imagine that several of the member states of the GCF have submitted proposals to LEAF. We understand that the process was rushed, so not a lot of consultation was possible. As you know, I've were in some of those discussions with some of the indigenous organizations, and what is really concerning to me, maybe we can all reflect here together to kind of crack that nut, if you will, is the fact that when we think of the social safeguards and Arts Trees uses Cancun safeguards, and one of the recommendations of the Cancun safeguards is that the architecture of RED programs provide for the full participation of indigenous communities in the mechanism of such programs. In this case, we know that these proposals have been submitted, and the expectation within LEAF and within jurisdictional programs in general is that the indigenous peoples, they benefit from eventual benefit sharing programs, right? Not from direct payments, even considering their carbon ownership rights, which is, one thing to consider. And the fact that it was rushed, indigenous peoples were not, to my knowledge, able to participate in
Did Beto cut out for other people?
Yeah, he cut out for
Yeah.
me too.
Okay, I think I know Beto well enough and I know his question, perhaps.
Okay, go for it.
Sure. So, and I really want Carlos to engage here because Carlos worked for all of June and much of July. I think the letters of interest were due end of July for LEAF with the states. What we had to do from the GCF perspective was figure out what the states needed to submit their letters of interest. The entire summer was really devoted to mobilizing consultancies to engage in LEAF letters of interest. And I know that one of the consultancies was looking at the safeguards question that Beto is talking about. From my perspective, but
I just came back.
Oh, good. Okay, Beto, I was kind of trying to adivinar what you were going to say, and we were talking about safeguards and LEAF and stuff like that.
So sorry, I just lost internet connection. How will they conciliate the fact that indigenous people were not able to participate in the mechanism itself, the design, because the percentage, I would imagine, will already have been set, therefore is not really in compliance with the Cancun safeguards, from my understanding. So.
So Carlos, can you talk a little bit about there was only 500 words right now on safeguards in the letters of interest, from what I understand, and how we're going to be going forward. And this is a concern that we have too. And that's why I wanted to mention the global and the regional committees as being forums. So what's happened so far with safeguards?
First of all, yes, Beto's concerns are totally right. What is desirable for a participatory process is to start from the beginning involving indigenous. And during the last 2 years, and from May or April of 2020 to now, we don't have the opportunity to talk and to have a presential meeting with indigenous. And I don't know if everyone or everybody knows, but for indigenous, the contact face-to-face is really important and essential for any kind of discussion. So due pandemic conditions, it was not possible to do that. So we have to get a lot of alternatives in terms of involving indigenous leaders in the discussions. We created some communication channels, but it was not easy. So what we try to do, considering the restrictions and the limitations of the LEAF program, is try to solve and to create intermediary solutions. We have some states that are advanced in terms of safeguards systems, but we know that they need to improve that, and the design of all the safeguard systems in the other 8 states are ongoing. And we are planning to have some kind of discussions in the next 2 months. Some of them will be presential. So a sanitary protocol was developed with the indigenous leaders to try to have presential meetings to discuss that. But we have additional challenges. For example, it is important to share information with the leaders, the indigenous leaders, about what RED Plus is, because to talk about to live, it's important to know what is RED Plus and how was decided, or how was created RED Plus and the perspectives of RED Plus. So we tried to do in the last 8 months to share information with them, to involve them in discussions about what is carbon market, what are the challenges, what are the opportunities. But it's not easier, as you may imagine. For us as technicians, to talk about LEAF and R3's methodology with some specific issues is not easy. Imagine when we are talking this kind of theme of issue with indigenous leaders. But we are on the track. I think for sure it is not the desirable process, but we will develop joint with the indigenous leaders what the regional or the subnational systems of safeguards. But one thing that is really is a concern for all the states at the subnational level is how to pay or how much benefits can we bring to the indigenous communities. Because the logic or the rationale of LEAF and any kind of REDD+ payment is based on flows and not in stocks. And what if we take a look on the indigenous lands, they are conserving their lands for years. And if we take a look on their territories on the maps, there is no significant deforestation reduction because they conserve the territory. The challenge is how to get to bring the necessary financial solutions or investments for them to improve their lives, to implement their plan of lives, their plans. So this is one challenge that we have on hand. And the other one is if we take a look about, for example, the revenues from LEAF for states, we have to consider that we will have a lot of cost to attend the requirements of LEAF. So we will have to pay consultancy for short-term, middle-term, and yearly monitoring from an international consultancy company. And we will have to spend to reduce deforestation. We will have to pay to the private owners for their efforts on reducing illegal deforestation, which is called aninhamento. How do you say aninhamento?
Alignment.
No, aninhamento. Well, I lost the. Como?
Nesting.
Nesting. Obrigado, Raíssa. Nesting. We have to include nesting, etc., etc. So the equation at the end is a very an input of the quantity of tons to be reduced by the price, and we have a list of variables that are part of the costs. So one of these costs is what is the level of investment that we can bring to the indigenous territories, and this is the other challenge, because depending on the revenues that a state could receive, this amount of money could be important or not necessarily expressive. So this is those are some challenges that we have to solve in the next weeks.
So I think Beto, thank you, Beto. And Jonah has moved on. Philippa, you're still our host?
I'm around for now. So I think the message here, first and foremost, is thank you so much to you, Colleen, and to the whole team for such thoughtful answers today. At this point in our call, sort of the official moderated session is considered complete, but I think, it sounds like there's a lot of interest around this topic, which is great. So we're going to leave the room open for folks to just sort of chat amongst themselves if they want. And yeah, I'll just hang around in case anyone has questions.
And thanks to Amazon Investors Coalition for this amazing opportunity to present. And like I said, we can go really deep in all sorts of little issues here. So feel free to reach out and we can do one-on-ones with folks too. But we're also happy to sit here for a little bit longer and answer any general questions. And thanks very much to Fernando and Carlos for joining me in this.
Thank you all.
Okay. If I'm not hearing other questions, and Lars, please send Elizabeth a big hug. She helped really, really move the GCF along, and it's great to see old and new friends.
All right. I think this is it.
I think this is it. Thanks, everyone.
Excellent.
Thank you
Until
so
next
much.
week.
Okay, thank you. And thanks again, Philippa. Please extend thanks to Jonah. This was great. We loved the opportunity and we really appreciate it.
Great. We'll talk to you guys again soon.
Okay,
Bye.
sounds good. Bye.
Thanks to all. Colleen, just a
Yeah.
word.
Yeah.
Seria bom perguntar para o Beto como foi, porque ele fez algumas reuniões com os indígenas sobre LIF. Então, quais são seria interessante saber com ele quais as propostas que ele tem e o que ele está pensando, né?
Exatamente. Talvez a gente pode marcar uma conversa essa semana. Pode ser?
Para mim, o governador Wilson Lima está vindo para Brasília na quarta-feira. Então, eu vou ficar quarta-feira o dia todo com ele. Então, se puder ser na quinta-feira à tarde ou na sexta-feira o dia todo, seria ótimo.
Ótimo, eu vou mandar um zap para ele, ok?
Ok.
Ok, obrigadão. Agora eu vou ver com minha filha. Estou saindo da Califórnia agora.
Eu preciso falar com você ainda sobre Belém. Em algum momento, amanhã você volta para Boulder?
Amanhã, sim.
Então a gente se fala amanhã ou depois da manhã.
Perfeito. Ok, obrigadão. Obrigada. Tchau, tchau.
Obrigado para a Jona, obrigado para a equipe.
Obrigado. Ok, beijos. Tchau, tchau.
Beijo, tchau, tchau.